Greetings inhabitants of YouTube. Once again, I'm here to bring you folks the truth, but this time regarding the Heisei movies. Up to this point, I've talked about each the MonsterVerse movies, each of the Reiwa movies, all 6 Millennium movies, and touched on the early Showa series from the first movie and its sequel Raids again onwards to 1984. But rather than go through the Heisei movies, like I did with the other movies, I thought that it would be more productive to talk about Miki Saegusa, the recurring character who was at the center of the Heisei films from Godzilla vs. Biollante all the way to Godzilla vs. Destroyah. If we view her as a point of view character like an audience surrogate, we can see that it is impossible to come to any other conclusion as to why she has garnered such a following among fans of the Heisei series. But before we get into the films with Miki, I might as well cover more about 84 than I did in the past, and what better way to do that than talking about the first reoccurring audience surrogate character? Raymond Burr's character, Steve Martin, from the Americanized, yet superior cut of the original Ghidorah, not to be confused with the comedian actor Steve Martin, but at this point, the joke is already gay. Yes, I know the American cut tends to get a bad rap for being a chopped up spineless shit version of Ghidorah that wasn't Honda's full vision and quote unquote whitewashed the anti-nuclear message of the original. But that ignores the fact that Raymond Burr always cared about the original message of Ghidorah, as on the nose as it was, and that despite the changes made to make the film more palatable for Western audiences, mostly the American audience, that resented Japan for the attack on Pearl Harbor and dragging them into World War II a decade earlier, mind you, the alterations do not erase the original message. And besides, both cuts of the film are readily available these days. Basically it was all just another lame duck excuse for ideologues to cry intersectional anti-American bullshit where none existed to begin with. Anyway, that's beside the point. Steve Martin was inserted into Ghidorah as an audience surrogate to make the film more accessible to American audiences of the 50s, but he is written to be an outside observer. An American who might otherwise have not been involved in this whole affair, but winds up witnessing how nuclear testing is affecting the nation of Japan. And who rightly considers Ghidorah to be a menace to the entire world. A 39-year-old reporter with several connections to the original cast, but has insecurities about their body image and their sexuality.
I don't need you. I don't need anybody. Get the hell out of here and stay out, you pervert!
Well, it's big and terrible.
As you may have seen from that scene, Steve was accompanied by a Japanese security officer named Tomo Iwaniga. So to see an American and a Japanese man witness a threat to the whole world can be read as a means to mend Japanese-American relations. And because Tomo dies while Steve gets severely injured, we can assume he's been having post-traumatic stress disorder for 30 years, from what he has seen. In the sequel, 1985, which can be correctly called a sequel to the Americanized original, since Sid 2 was Americanized, Steve is called by the US government to tell them what he knows. Though I don't know why he would say Shodaigoji's body was never found, suggesting that Shodaigoji and 84 Goji are the same Godzilla. Either it's an error on part of the localizers, or that Steve's memory is becoming faulty as he was told by Emiko how the oxygen destroyer works. By the end of the film, when 84 Goji falls into the volcano, Steve gives a closing monologue about Godzilla's role in nature's plan to remind man of their place. That monologue still resonates with people who fondly remember watching 1985 in theaters when they were kids, and also their parents who saw the Americanized original when they were kids as well. I may not always like 84 for discontinuing the Showa era of Godzilla, but both the Americanized versions of the original and its Heisei sequel complete one another. And besides, we have several continuities at this point to pick and choose. Now that we've gone over the first Heisei film, let us begin at the beginning of the Miki Saegusa story. We first meet Miki Saegusa in the direct sequel to 84, which is the best film in the Heisei series, only to be followed by coincidentally the worst film in the Heisei series, Godzilla vs. Biollante. If I were to talk about everything wrong with this film, I'd be here for hours, So put simply, director and writer Kazuki Omori was more interested in coming up with new approaches in combating Godzilla, be they anti-nuclear energy, bacteria and telepathy, that he ignored already established approaches like cadmium missiles and bird sounds which worked last time. There was no in-universe explanation why those older approaches were obsolete and why the newer approaches were needed, so it comes across as reinventing the wheel. Anyway, back on topic. When we meet Miki in versus Biollante, she is a 17-year-old ward of a psionic institute. Her parents are a complete mystery, but we do see that she's accompanied by Oscar Akauchi, who we can assume is her mentor, caretaker, and confidant. Both Miki and Oscar are psychics. The former is introduced using extrasensory perception, or ESP, to communicate with Erika Shiragomi's life essence and the roses to no avail at first, but before leaving, she does sense that a girl's voice was reaching out to Oscar, but the latter couldn't perceive it. We then see that both girls are the oldest in a group of children with psychic powers at the institute, and Miki and the children were able to foresee Godzilla's return. Now, the reason the Heisei films introduced psychics this early was because in the 70s and the 80s there was an obsession for psychics in Japanese society, and there was a hub for this kind of research. Both the United States and the Soviet Union heavily invested militarily in this realm, believing that they can weaponize telepathy or be able to foresee an attack coming beforehand. So we see in this film, and later on in the series, that Miki will be roped into military operations such as detecting where Godzilla and Biollante are. And speaking of which, Miki is able to sense Erika's life essence in Biollante, which shows that she's characterized as having some sort of empathy. The most impressive feat that Miki pulls off in this film is using all of her mental strength to communicate with Godzilla telepathically, stalling him so as to give people more time to evacuate. She does all this, and collapses from the effort. We then see that Oscar remains at Miki's side till she recuperates, and afterwards for the finale of the film. All of which can make one believe that Miki and Oscar have a loyal and intimate relation. Now, if there's one alteration I'd make for the film, in relation to Miki, it would be to have her foresee which heat pad S9 would stand on, so Major Kuroki would push the button and cook him for murdering Erika's father, Dr. Shiragomi. Overall, a good start for Miki as a character that we'll follow throughout these movies. ESP was an interesting addition to the series, and it's utilized well in foreseeing coming events and attempting to communicate with Godzilla rather than conflict. Fasting forward to 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, the film is somewhat of a step up from the last one, but the writing is still sloppy, and it doesn't help that the film incited controversy over having a strong theme in favor of Japanese imperialism. Kazuki Omori denied any allegations that he wrote a pro-imperialist anti-American hit piece, but even CNN reported on it back when they cared about telling the truth.
Sheer longevity. None of them can hold a candle to the monster from the land of the rising sun, Godzilla. He's currently starring in his 18th film, and as Taylor Henry reports, the plotline has stirred up a bit of controversy.
In Japan's latest Godzilla movie, this is the great showdown. Godzilla taking on the three-headed monster, King Ghidorah. But some might regard the plot of the movie, released December 14th in Japan, as anti-US. Time travelers arrive in UFOs from the 23rd century. Japan, they say, will rise to become the world's greatest power, only to be destroyed by Godzilla. Godzilla, once a dinosaur friendly to Japan, the movie explains, helped Japanese defeat Americans in a World War II Pacific battle.
Dinosaur! Forget it! First attacking our board! A dinosaur? What?
The time travelers go back to the wartime era and try to prevent the dinosaur's exposure to American hydrogen bomb testing that transforms it into the fire-breathing Godzilla, destined to turn on Japan. But at the same time, they don't want Japan to become too strong and upset the world balance of power. So King Ghidorah is created to keep Japan in check. Director Kazuki Omori says this appeal to the Japanese survival instinct is not meant to be anti-American.
The movie is not especially anti-US. I just thought I'd try to picture the identity of the Japanese people.
Those who've seen it appear fascinated with this Godzilla's 18th movie, produced at a cost of about $12 million. It's expected to bring more than $15 million at the box office. Godzilla may win the mortal battle against King Ghidorah. Will Japan be saved from Godzilla? The public may have to wait until the next Godzilla movie, already in the planning stages, to find out. Taylor Henry, CNN, Tokyo.
And then Tomoyuki Tanaka, one of Godzilla's creators, came out saying that he thought the film was in bad taste, especially when you consider that he and Honda were conscripted against their will to fight for the Japanese Empire, and both men tried to rectify their mistakes through their art for all the world to see. Enough of that. Miki at this point is of legal age, but is no longer with Oscar for whatever reason. If I had to guess, Oscar ran off with Kirishima somewhere. So on her own, Miki keeps tracks of Godzilla for the military in the event he starts acting up again. Later on she joins an expedition with Futurians to 1944, and she's able to recognize Godzillasaurus as the Heisei Godzilla that she communicated with telepathically. It couldn't have been Shodai Goji, because he was a different species than 84 Goji, but that's a can of worms I don't want to get into. When Godzillasaurus is left resting after his bloody battle with American soldiers, Miki suggests that it'll be happier for everyone to let him heal and leave him be on his island. That is the empathic side of her character which a lot of people admire, and we'll see that expanded on later in the films. But it's undermined when Godzillasaurus is teleported to the bottom of the Bering Sea, and Miki admires it. As I said in the past, it's never made clear if Godzillasaurus can breathe underwater, unlike the previous movies that didn't mention it, but showed that even an irradiated Godzilla can breathe underwater, but even then submerging yourself with deep open wounds in a body water will deplete your body of blood, and you'll die of blood loss rather quickly. Meaning that Godzillasaurus would either drown or bleed to death long before a Soviet nuke would irradiate and mutate him into 84 Goji, all of which breaks continuity. Miki at the very least should have thought of that. The rest of the film follows Emi Kano breaking away from her fellow Futurians and their plan, even though she did most of their work, which meant she had to have known what she was doing. And after the battle between Godzilla and Mecha King Ghidorah, Miki thanks Emi for all she did before she goes back to the future. So yeah, GVKG is definitely Miki at her lowest valley in terms of her character writing. Godzilla vs. Mothra, the battle for Earth, while better than its predecessor, is one in which the decisions of the humans ultimately don't matter because they end being invalidated multiple times by either the choices the kaiju or the Shobijin make. For instance, the mission to take Mothra's egg from Infant Island was pointless because Mothra hatched and swam back to the island. Sure, it brought the Shobijin from Infant Island to Japan, but they could flown back as shown by the end of the story, thus preventing Mothra causing quality real damage just to retrieve them, when they were the ones who called her to come get them, so it makes them both retarded, and needlessly cruel in this case. But we are not here to talk about the Shobijin in this video. While Miki's character decisions don't amount to anything in the plot, her characterization is still discernible. Like always, she continues to keep track of Godzilla for the military and Akira Takorada up till the halfway mark. Halfway through the movie, Miki helps a divorced couple Fujita and Tezuka locate the Shobijin through her ESP to stop Lava Mothra's rampage. Now, while it's good that Miki did this out of the empathy and goodness of her heart, she should not have had to do this. Because as said earlier, the Shobijin could have flew back with Mothra to Infant Island after she hatched to keep her safe. And even if the Shobijin wanted to let the whole world know that mankind has set up the dominoes that'll lead to their doom for what they've done to the planet because of their greed, the divorced couple and the business guy Andos could have bought them a platform to spread their message, or hell even have Andos boss buy them a slot on television or on the radio. But they didn't, because Fujita and Tezuka were so inept in losing the Shobijin, and in bringing their daughter Midori along, while Mothra's on a rampage, that I think Emma and Mark Russell from King of the Monsters 2019 could give them advice on how to be good parents. By the end of the film, Miki and others wave Mothra goodbye. Nothing else to elaborate on, but nothing short of poetry. According to Toho Kingdom, the Japanese military entertainment complex didn't like how Godzilla vs. Mothra portrayed the Japanese military as heartless when they were firing at Mothra, so they pulled the plug on any more collaborations with Toho. As a result, the rest of the Heisei films would center around G-Force, an international joint military organization formed by the United Nations and the Japanese Special Defense Force. Their first debut being Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla II, the so-called mother of all Godzilla adventures, which is a weird tagline to be honest, but it does relate to Baby Godzilla in a way. This is where the Heisei movies start to pick up in terms of quality, contrary to what Blue Nova would have you believe. He called this film and the two films afterwards the G-Force trilogy, so that's what I'm going to refer to these films as. This is also the start to the Heisei films being better than the Monster vs. Godzilla films, after 3 films that stumbled out of the gate following 84. We see that Miki has been enrolled into G-Force, usually keeping to herself from her colleagues, but loyal to defending Japan from Godzilla as per usual. We also see that she's kept in touch with the warded children and the Psionic Institute, suggesting that despite her parents being a mystery, she's glad to have a home to remember fondly. When Baby Godzilla hatches, Miki's senses tingle for warning her of Godzilla, and the very next shot is Godzilla destroying an oil refinery. Now, when Blue Nova made his video titled "The Heisei Godzilla Movies Aren't Good," he used the scene I described to paint Miki as inept at her role as a psychic warning people of Godzilla's coming, but Miki was never appointed by the military or G-Force to be a forewarner of Godzilla attacks, so it just makes Blue Nova all around inept at being a critic. Later on in the film, G-Force planned on using Baby Godzilla as a decoy for their plan against Godzilla, and this gets Miki to doubt her loyalty, and gets her to think that perhaps fighting Godzilla all this time isn't worth while if it's come to using a newly born Godzillasaurus who did nothing wrong as bait. Despite having her doubts, she's assigned to join the G-Crusher planned by Takaaki Aso's command. If it means that it would end the fight against Godzilla, she might as well get it over with. So she puts on her night vision goggles and uses her ESP to pinpoint Godzilla's second brain, and Godzilla gets lobotomized, paralyzed and crippled. But ultimately, Rodan sacrifices himself by giving his life essence to Godzilla, allowing his second brain to regrow, and gaining his red spiral atomic breath ability. But it will come at a cost later on. Godzilla ends up defeating MechaGodzilla in a great ball of fire, but Miki and her fellow pilots manage to survive. Miki then gets a call from Azusa, who mothered Baby Godzilla, to use her ESP to convince Baby Godzilla that he's better off in Godzilla's care and protection. And so Miki does just that out of the loyalty of her friend, and so Baby Godzilla has a makeshift family, like she has. Going back to Blue Nova's horrendous video, he did say that Azusa isn't a character, which is retarded, and that she and Miki should have been combined during the writing of the script, because they both share a similar motivation, yet their contributions to the story are too spread out, or something retarded on those lines. Miki wasn't in the lab when Baby Godzilla hatched, so she couldn't have been imprinted as his mother. That was Azusa's role in the story. It's what makes her and Miki distinct characters. What Blue Nova did in his video is bastardize Chekhov's gun. It's a principle which means paying off every setup you introduce in a story, but Blue Nova warped it into meaning reduce your story to the most bare bones so as to not feel redundant. I understand that stories should be revised to the best they can be, and the benefit of being precise, but sometimes, a critic makes a criticism that tantamounts to the efficiency fallacy. So at the end of the story, Miki watches as Godzilla and Baby walk away, and she wishes both to take care. Despite Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla being the weakest in the G-Force trilogy, this is where fans of the Heisei series highlight as the peak of Miki's characterization. Miki has now become the head of G-Force's new psychic center, wherein she gets to be like a mother figure to psychic children. We see that she's got her hair trimmed to a pixie cut when it was much longer in the last movie. Pixie cuts usually represent female empowerment as well as bold, fearless, and independent personalities, which we'll see play out through Miki. She refuses to partake in the T-Project, a plan to plant an amplifier on Godzilla's neck, so telepathy can be used to synchronize his brainwaves with Miki's, so she can control his every move. Miki sees this as futile as she communicated with Godzilla back in vs Biollante, and the effort caused her to pass out. Even if it wasn't futile, however, she sees no ethical reason to control another's thoughts or actions, and the project being an amplifier means that the telepathic communication would come off as screaming in a person's head, kind of like how a dog's bark is worse than their bite. Being that she was the reason G Crusher worked in the last film, she would know how it feels to take someone's life when you use another's life as bait, and another giving their life so that someone you had a hand in killing lives on. This is ultimately why she believes in trying to understand the other side's perspective and their feelings, even if that other side is Godzilla, the same creature from '84. I've seen critics, like Blue Nova again, say that Miki is insane for trying to tell people to understand the other side, which happens to be Godzilla, because how dare she say Godzilla has feeling too? They must have watched a bad subtitled version of the film, or they are simply making a criticism that is nothing more than personal incredulity. Just because they don't believe Godzilla can be understood and empathized with, doesn't mean that it's nonsensical for Miki to try to understand and feel sorry for Godzilla. Moving on, we see that she's wearing Shobijin earrings, and that the Shobijin themselves appear to Miki, warning her of SpaceGodzilla's coming to Earth to kill Godzilla, so this makes her go along with the T-Project, if it means not using Emo gear up. We don't know how Miki got those earrings, nonetheless, she's wearing them. On Birth Island, Miki's recognized by little Godzilla, and it's a cute scene. It's also an inverse of the hill scene from the 1954 Godzilla, whereas that scene was meant to be nightmare fuel, this scene is meant to be sentimental. Later on in the story, Miki gets abducted by corporate mafia, the backers of the T-Project. They're like the mob from the Yakuza Sega games. They kidnapped her, so they can copy her brain waves, so they can control Godzilla as their mob enforcer without her, which is an aspect of the unmade Batman vs Godzilla film that I covered previously. Miki's friends then come to save her. During the rescue, she uses a new ESP technique, telekinesis, to levitate the bed that she's strapped down to, so her rescuer can score a direct hit on her captors. This shows that, just because Miki believes in the value of life, that doesn't mean that she's a pushover. She helped a friend who was being fired on, saving his life, so he can save her. And finally, after recuperating, Miki and company commandeer a motorboat to witness the final battle and to see if their loved ones that were operating Emo gear make it back alive. After Godzilla's victory, Miki telekinetically removes the T-Project mind control device that had been placed on his neck, prompting a nod from Godzilla. The Cosmos appeared and thanked Miki before saying goodbye. And we see Miki perform another ESP ability, projection. She projects in Koji's mind that little Godzilla is okay when he was imprisoned by SpaceGodzilla prior. So yeah, GVSG does well for Miki. Finally we turn to Godzilla vs Destroyah, the conclusion of the Heisei saga, the end of the Miki Saegusa story, and the best of the G-Force trilogy as well as the second best Heisei movie just behind '84, because it finally remembered that cadmium was effective. The film pays a lot of homages to the original Godzilla as this was supposed to be the last Godzilla movie. Shinkichi took the Yamoni and left behind a legacy for his two descendants. Kenkichi had the right idea to create a new oxygen destroyer when Serizawa chose not to, but changes his plan to have Destroyah and Godzilla fight and kill each other. The only actress from the original Godzilla, Momoko Kochi, returns to reprise her role as Emiko, but not Akira Takorada as Ogata. Perhaps those two didn't get married after Serizawa's death. But I will commend that Momoko Kochi didn't age as poorly as Carrie Fisher did after Star Wars, though she and Mark Hamill got to be together for one scene in The Last Jedi. So there's that. Lastly, this film was the last Godzilla film Akira Ifukube composed for less than a decade before he passed away in 2006. And yes, I know it's Destroyah, but I'm sticking with Destroyah because that's how I remember hearing it in the Atari games.
Destroyah versus Anguirus. Destroyah versus Destroyah.
Anyways, it's July 1996. In the very first scene, we see that Miki notices that the island Godzilla and little Godzilla were on has vanished off the map. Godzilla surfaces and demolishes Hong Kong, all while looking different. The life essence Rodan gave him 2 movies prior is taking its toll on Godzilla's heart, and like a nuclear meltdown, he'll give off so much heat that he'll set the atmosphere on fire, which was what Oppenheimer feared would happen when creating the atomic bomb. While everyone's wondering what to do with Godzilla and the emergence of Destroyah, Miki is off looking for Godzilla Jr., but she has trouble finding him because her ESP powers are fading away. Eventually she does find Jr. alive and well, but looking more grown up, and she believes Godzilla is looking for his son. Jr. must have been frightened by Godzilla's rapid increase in temperature that he ran away, and Godzilla has been looking for him to assure him that he didn't mean to chase him away. Meanwhile, we are introduced to Meru Ozawa, who came from an ESP school in America and transferred over to Japan. Miki takes on Meru as a pupil of hers, so she can teach her what she knows about ESP. And like any other mentor who knows their students will make mistakes, but will put up with it anyway, she puts up with Meru's initiative to lure Jr. to Tokyo, if it means Godzilla will follow and cross paths with Destroyah. In Star Wars, Qui-Gon Jinn knew this when he was training Obi-Wan, who also knew this when training Anakin Skywalker, who also knew this when training Ahsoka Tano, so on and so forth. During the helicopter flight to lure Jr., Meru holds Miki's hand to get her to offer her ESP, and so Miki does. This tells me that Miki will not only walk Meru's path with her, but she will accept any intimacy, just like her mentor Oscar did, but this time, Miki won't abandon Meru like Oscar abandoned her. In Tokyo, Jr. puts up a really damn good fight against Destroyah. At one point in the fight, Destroyah turns into his flying form and is about to kill Meru and Miki, but Jr. saves them, blasting Destroyah out of the sky. After the fight, they watch as Godzilla and Jr. reunite, but their reunion is cut short when Destroyah takes on his final form and grabs Jr. and flies off. He then drops him to the ground and spams his micro-oxygen beam, all to finish their last battle, and for humiliating him. Jr. is dying. Miki dreads that Godzilla die getting revenge on Destroyah, and when Godzilla offer a bit of his life essence doesn't revive Jr., he goes all scorched earth. Just as the landscape became hellish in 84, Miki and Meru try to survive the wreckage of Godzilla and Destroyah's final battle with fire and rubble everywhere, but they are rescued by G-Force. Godzilla weakens Destroyah just even for the military to finish him off, and seeing that his son's killer is vanquished, Godzilla's meltdown commences, and it's heartbreaking.
Well, I liked it. I liked the Destroyer movie very much. The attack on Hong Kong was not exactly what I wrote, but it's very, very good.
I think the Destroyer movie is an insult to everybody.
Oh, shut up.
Listen, I love every Godzilla film just because it's Godzilla. Godzilla looks great in it, but Toho everybody seems to, have bought this Godzilla dies crap. And I mean, come on, a lot of other movies were a lot more emotional, with either Godzilla being beaten or actually dying. This was just a marketing thing. He's back in 5 minutes at the end of the film. I mean,
I give you that. I give you that. I agree. I think that was a bit of a cop out.
The film is a marketing farce. They blew it up to be something it's not. This is the way that they compete with the Gamera series now is to blow their films out of proportion as works of art, and they're going to be they're going back to the horror atmosphere of the original film. That's
I'll give you all
load
that.
of baloney.
I'll give you all of that in a sense. I agree that Toho is very cynical, but I do think that Destroyer was extremely well made.
Miki's work with Godzilla is done. She and Meru mourn his death, but then they see that the radiation isn't engulfing the Earth. Instead, they witness a lone figure standing in the darkness. It's Godzilla Jr. resurrected, having absorbed the radiation and grown to full size. So, having done a chronological retelling with a focus on Miki, what more can be said about the conclusion? Well, the Heisei era of Godzilla can be compared to the Renaissance era of Disney. Both are looked back on as the highest points in their respective franchises' histories, for being a time capsule for anyone watching decades wanting to know what it was like back then, and for anyone with nostalgia for the 90s in general. There's even a shot of Rodan flying over Tokyo Disneyland in Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla II, so this point isn't just arbitrary. One of the reasons why both Heisei Godzilla and Disney were financially successful could be because both had their foot in the door, that is the girls' entertainment market. I guess in a way Miki can be compared to any Disney princess, which means that, while she's an audience surrogate character, she still has characteristics that make her distinct, but still has plenty of room for an audience member to put themselves in her shoes. In fact, that is true for any character regardless of characterization. Obviously the boys market had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers, and Godzilla being a dinosaur meant that he's always had such an appeal to boys, but girls have always gravitated to things like My Little Pony and Disney princesses, even Mothra. Which is why Godzilla vs. Mothra Battle for Earth did so well, that it spawned the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy. And when I thought about all of that, another aspect of this conclusion occurred to me. There was a very shrewd reason as to why every Godzilla movie, since the beginning, has had a female human lead. For example, the original Godzilla had Emiko and all of her outfits. Raids again had Hidemi Yamaji be an average middle-class woman and supportive girlfriend. All the way up to now we have Godzilla against MechaGodzilla with Akane Yashino as the main protagonist. Even the legendary 2014 film had Elle as a nurse. King of the Monsters lead Madison being played by Millie Bobby Brown for the Gen Z audience, and so on. Therefore, it all made sense to have the Heisei movies capitalize on Miki being the recurring lead with a connection to Godzilla, because that attracted more female fans into the kaiju genre. Anyway, this video was the last one that I've planned in the pipeline, but then recent events happened which caused me to offshoot, and now I'm in a position where I can focus all of my energy into completing my next latest breakdown, which might as well be my final video. Until then, I do wish you all a happy Godzilla Day this November 3rd. Good night.